Well, we have a special guest with us this morning, actually some special guests. We have Nate and Renee Butler with us, and Nate, why don't you come and join me up on the platform here. Nate runs a ministry called Comics 35. And we've got some other special guests here that are related to you. We've got Kathleen Lawler. Where's Kathleen at? Kathleen. In the back. In the back. Oh, here's pointing to you. And I think Clyde Count is hanging around here someplace too, isn't he? There's Clyde over there. Okay. So Clyde and Kathleen were real instrumental in helping your ministry get started. Tell us a bit about what it is that you do.
Comics 35 is a ministry that we train people to produce their own comics for their own people, their own cultures, their own languages, for themselves. And we started in 1996, and Kathleen was our administrator, and Clyde was our, Clyde, what would you call it? Well, he was the chief cook and bottle washer and everything that in helping launch the ministry. There would be no Comics 35 ministry without Kathleen and Clyde, and we all, well, Kathleen largely put together our first seminar in the Philippines in '96. And the X35 and IMCOMI X35 is Exodus 35 verses 30 to 35, where God gifts the artisans who will create the works of art for the tabernacle, and also gives them the ability to teach that. And that's what I worked in comics for Archie and DC and Marvel Comics and the Jim Henson people, and then the Lord called me into this ministry helping other people do the work.
Now, I think a lot of us, we hear about comic books, we don't make the instant connection to great way to share the gospel.
Yes.
What makes this such a powerful tool?
Is a really powerful 1-2 combination of text and visuals, engaging both sides of the brain. Text processes one side, visuals on the other. It pulls people in, and it's a great way to engage, particularly male populations that are not big readers. We're doing work in prisons, and so it's and then also in this country we don't think of comics as a true mass medium, which it is not in this country anymore. Even with the current Marvel movies, biggest selling comic book in the U.S. probably sells 1 to 2 million copies. Biggest selling comic book in Japan sells 3 million copies a week. So,
wow. And when you say 1 to 2 million copies in the United States, that's probably that's not per week, is it?
No, that's a year.
That's a year.
Yeah.
My goodness. Well, we have been honored, privileged to support you, be a partner in what you're doing, and it's great to have you here with us this morning.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dungeness community, for your support. Thank you.
Now, Nate and I are going to try something this morning. It worked first service, so chances are it may work again second service, we're hoping. So I'm going to preach and he's going to draw, and we're going to see if those two things go together. So why don't you go to the board, and I'll talk about a new series that we're starting today. I sent out an email earlier this week about it. We are calling it David's Greatest Hits, Solid Gold Songs. And do you know what it takes for something to be rated as a solid gold song? It's changed a bit over the years. The very first solid gold song was awarded back in 1937. And it was a company called Regal Zonophone. And the guy that won the first gold was George Formby for his song, The Window Cleaner. And it sold 100,000 copies, and that qualified him as solid gold in 1937. Now, to show you how much it grew over the next few years, by 1942, so 5 years later, it was the song by Glenn Miller, Chattanooga Choo Choo, that got awarded gold, and it has sold 1.2 million copies. Now, in the early days, what qualified something as solid gold was a bit nebulous. A lot of it was based on kind of record companies promoting their own labels, making up their own designations. But by 1976, the recording industry of America had decided they needed to standardize on what qualified something as solid gold. And so they decided that any song that sold 500,000 copies or more qualified as solid gold. Now, King David lived long before we started giving out that designation. But if he'd been around, I think we find that he would have had a lot of solid gold hits. And what we're going to do this summer is we are going to take some of those favorite psalms, songs that David wrote, and talk about them. We're going to have some different speakers coming this summer. I've been in touch with them, and we've all said, well, here are some of our favorite songs that we want to talk about. And this morning, I'm going to start with what is probably the biggest hit of all of David's hits, and that is Psalm 23. We probably all know it. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me to lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. For you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. A little boy once was reciting that, and his opening line went like this: the Lord is my shepherd, I don't want anything else. Now the fact is, David doesn't promise that with God as our shepherd, we'll have everything that we want given to us. There's lots of things that we want that really aren't good for us. What he says is, because the Lord is my shepherd, I'm not going to come up short. The things that I really need, that my soul needs, I'm not going to be short on those. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. You guys are giving me the high side, my mic is acting up. Everything seems tight up here, guys. Yeah, I could go with a handheld. Actually, behold. You can draw, but I can blow a rabbit out of a hat. You know, we might retitle this psalm as a song for worried sheep. Being a sheep in a desert region is cause to worry. I grew up around Squim, and around here we have alfalfa fields and irrigation, and you never see a skinny cow. But if you live in Palestine, if you live in a hot, arid, desert kind of region, and you're a sheep, you could have cause for concern. But David says that this sheep is in good pasture. Of course, it's also a sheep that lives in a world full of predators. That too can keep you awake at night. You know, sheep are pretty low in terms of the old food chain. Now, bottom of the food chain has to be mice. Any carnivore bigger than a mouse eats mice. Right above mice are chicken and rabbits. And of course, everything tastes like chicken, right? But just above chicken and rabbits are sheep. They're slow, they're dumb, and they're tasty. And so being a sheep is a dangerous thing to do. And the problem too is that sheep are, well, they're not very good at defending themselves. In fact, Nate, do you want to know just how defenseless sheep are?
How defenseless are they, Tim?
In a word, Nate, emu.
Emu.
Emu. Emus are a large bird. I actually used to own a pair of emus. And they're about half the size of an ostrich. So an ostrich can be upwards of 9 feet tall. An emu gets to be about 5'7" to 5'9". Ostrich can run 60 miles an hour. Emu can run 30 miles an hour. The other trait of emus is they are really, really stupid. I mean rock dumb. However, people with sheep sometimes buy emus and put them in with the sheep because it turns out that the one natural enemy an emu has is the dingo, a wild dog. And so emus do not like dogs, and if a dog gets in, emus will go after it. Which means if a coyote gets into the pen with the sheep, the emu goes after it and starts kicking it. Now, could I just say that if you need an emu to act as your bodyguard, you're not very good at self-defense. So if you're a sheep living in hostile territory, the best thing that you can hope for is that you're being cared for by a good shepherd. pictures himself as one of those vulnerable, easily worried, often endangered lambs. And he says, I've made a choice about who I'm going to follow. I'm going to follow the Lord. In fact, the name for God used there is his covenant name, Yahweh. It's the name he gave to Moses, that translated it simply means, I am. I am all-sufficient. And David says, who is my shepherd? My shepherd is the all-sufficient one that can meet all of my needs. He says, because the Lord is my shepherd, I'm refreshed. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. David sees the Lord as a shepherd who is first and foremost concerned for the well-being of his flock. Green pastures. I talked about this a little bit yesterday at Clark's Memorial. People run after lots of things looking for greener pastures, don't they? We try all kinds of things that we think are going to satisfy the deepest longings of our soul. As someone has cynically observed, the grass is always greenest over the septic tank. Because so often the things that we thought were going to really satisfy us, when we really dig into it, we find that it comes up short. In fact, sometimes it comes up poisonous. And David says, with the Lord as my shepherd, I know the pastures that he provides for me really are what my soul longs for. They satisfy me deeply. He said he makes me lie down. He makes me rest. You know, rest is a theme that flows throughout the scriptures. In the beginning, in Genesis, we find that God creates and then he rests. God meets Moses on Sinai and he gives to him the 10 Commandments. And what is commandment number 3? Rest. Take a day every week and rest and worship. When you get to the New Testament, you find Jesus with his disciples. And his popularity is swelling and the crowds are gathering. And what does Jesus do at the zenith of popularity? He detaches from the crowd. He takes his disciples and he goes to a desert place where it's quiet and they rest. You remember Martha and Mary, the two sisters that Jesus and a bunch of other folks are at their house for lunch, and Martha has got herself worked into a tizzy trying to get lunch ready. Turns out that Mary is out just sitting at Jesus' feet listening. Martha, frustrated, harried, comes in and says, Lord, can't you make her do something? And he says, you know, actually, she's chosen the better thing. She's listening. She's being quiet. How are you doing when it comes to rest? I think sometimes we get exhausted because we're taking on things that God hasn't called us to. Or we're failing to honor that commandment to rest, to be content, to cease from our labors. And we all have the reasons. We all say, I'm too busy, there are too many demands, I can't do it. I was looking this week at the story of John and Charles Wesley's mother, Susanna. Susanna had 19 children. Burnett and I raised 4 kids, and I can tell you that's hectic all by itself. We got some grandkids now. The best thing is to have them one at a time. But Susanna had 19 children. How do you find quiet in the middle of all of that? Well, the story is told of Susanna that she had trained the children that if she put her apron over her head, that was Mama's quiet time and they were to leave her alone. And that's what Susanna did. She would sit in the middle of all the hectic hubbub, put her apron over her head, and have time to pray. Rest is something that all of us need to do, that God desires to be a part of our life. Probably one of the best decisions Burnett and I ever made years ago was to honor a day of rest. Burnett was working full-time, putting me through graduate school. I was working part-time. I was also a youth pastor. I was a full-time student. I was in student body government. We were more than busy. In the middle of all that, we decided that we were going to take Sundays off, which made no sense because there was too much to do. I got to tell you, we came to value Sundays so much. It was the break that we needed. And you know what? Everything got done that really needed to be done. There may be a couple papers that I could have had an A on that I got a B on. But you'll never know which ones they were. And in the big picture, it didn't matter. He makes me lie down. David's discovery was that the shepherd restores my soul. He says, because the Lord is my shepherd, I'm safe. He leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Not every shepherd is good, and not every path is safe. Philip Keller, in his meditation on Psalm 23, Philip was himself a shepherd in New Zealand. And he talks about people who, as he says it, despite their dazzling outward show of success, despite their affluence and their prestige, remain poor in spirit, shriveled in soul and unhappy in life, held in the iron grip and heartless ownership of the wrong master. Ephesians chapter 2, verses 1 through 3 mentions 3 of those masters that can hold us in their grip. Paul says, you were dead in the trespasses and sins in which you once walked, following 1, the course of this world, 2, the prince of the power of the air, the spirit that is now at work in the sons of disobedience, among whom we all once lived, and 3, the passions of our flesh, carrying out the desires of the body and mind. Think about those. The course of this world. If there's one thing that sheep are legendary for, it is going with the crowd. Wherever the other sheep are going, there they go. Do you remember Steven Spielberg years ago did the movie E.T.? And there was a candy that showed up in E.T. Anyone remember what the candy was? Reese's Pieces. Now, it was not an advertisement blatantly for Reese's Pieces. Don't worry, they wanted it to show up in the movie. But it was just very gentle, kind of subliminal. You know what happened because of that? Within 2 weeks of the movie's release, sales for Reese's Pieces tripled. We tend to be sheep. If everybody's doing it, along we go for the ride. I talked to a girl this week who is coming off of addiction. And she said that one of the first steps for her was she had to change all of her friends. Because the world that she was living in, the course that it was on, kept dragging her back to that old master. The second thing, the prince of the power of the air, Satan. Scripture teaches us that there is more going on than just us, that there is a liar, a deceiver that wants to hurt those that God loves, wants to enslave. And then there are the passions of our flesh. Here's the stuff that makes us vulnerable. It's our own hunger. There's nothing wrong with hunger in itself, but it's misdirected hunger that gets us into trouble. Every marketer knows this. You have hungers, and if you can appeal to the hunger, and if you can give people a shortcut to have the hunger met, you're going to sell product. McDonald's kept reminding us that we deserve a break today. Right now, get that Big Mac. Amazon has come out with one-click shopping. If you see it, tap the button, it's yours. But a self-shepherding, hunger-driven, free-range sheep is a sheep that's in trouble. Philip Keller observed that sheep left untended will destroy a pasture and starve to death. David says that God is leading us in right paths for his name's sake. His own reputation as a shepherd is tied to how well he is leading us. And then he says, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, because you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. The song takes a rather sudden, dark, foreboding, and yet intimate turn here. One minute we have this sheep, fat and happy, resting in nice green pastures with quiet water flowing by. And now suddenly we see him in hostile territory. He's hemmed in by high valley walls of a ravine. There are hungry eyes that are watching his every move, looking for an opportunity to attack. Death and danger are almost palpable. And yet surprisingly, David says, I will fear no evil. Well, why is he not afraid? He says, well, it's because the shepherd is there. And yet if you look at the wording, it's changed. Because he started off talking in kind of a third-person sense about, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down. He leads me. Suddenly he says, I will not be afraid. Why? Because you are with me. In the moment of danger, God is not just someone over there to be talked about. He is someone that David looks to intimately and personally to say, you are the only reason that I'm going to make it through this valley. He says it's not just because there's safety in numbers, and it's not just because the shepherd is a passive presence. He says the shepherd has tools of power. He has a rod, he has a staff. He has a weapon to drive away the enemies. He has a staff, a tool to rescue and to guide me as I go through that dark valley. You know, the valley is a place that we all have to tread. And you'll note that he says, though I walk through the valley. We'd all like to get through the valley as quickly as possible, wouldn't we? I remember being a kid. I'd gone down fishing in Port Williams, and riding home late in the evening, the sun was going down. I got to that part of the road that it winds through the trees. And somewhere in the middle of the dark, windy road, I got the idea in my head that there was something that was after me. Fastest I ever rode down that road, because I just wanted out of the woods. Ever have those experiences? You just want out. But we all know that when you're in the valley, there's no quick way out. You have to walk through it. Grief is a journey of years, not weeks. Sickness can be chronic. Dysfunctional relationships may last a lifetime. I'm not even sure that the valley of the shadow of death is a single valley. I think there can be a chain of them sometimes that we go through in life. But the good news is that the valley is not a box canyon. It's not a dead end. David says, I walk through the valley. Nate, you've been in the valley before.
Yes, I have. My first wife, Susan, she and I were married for 30 years and 1 month. She passed away 1 month after our 33rd anniversary. She had ovarian cancer, and those 4 years were, that was a long valley for us to go through. And they told us at the beginning of those 4 years, she was misdiagnosed, they couldn't save her. She had 3 to 5 years tops, and she made it 4. But she was a servant. She was very much a servant-hearted person, and she taught me, she decided she was going to train me the hardest way possible for a man, hardest way for a woman to train. She was going to do it by example. And as I say, men, don't hate me for giving us all away, but we're all kind of dense, picking up on examples, because that's why our wives nag us, because we don't. But Susan was just like, nope, by example. And so for 26 years, she waited on me hand and foot, and I was like, this works for me. And when she got sick, I suddenly realized she had trained me for 26 years to take care of her for her last 4. And the word is true. It's more blessed to give than to receive. They were horrible 4 years because of the cancer, but 4 of the sweetest years of our marriage, because I finally learned to be a servant and to serve her and take care of her. And when after she passed away, Renee and I had no intention of getting married again. I said, the Lord gave me the best wife the first time. I'm not getting married again. But again, it's like, Yahweh's arm is too short. He couldn't do it. He couldn't give me 2 great wives. But the Lord had other ideas. And when Renee and I got together, the Lord told me, he said, you will serve her. And I was a little taken aback, but I thought, well, I did that for 4 years with Susan, so I know how to do that. And so now whenever I forget, I'm a man, I forget, and the Lord and I it's like, well, what about my needs? The Lord is like, what part of you will serve her was unclear to me. So I serve her, and thankfully she's just a little bundle of love. I can't fill her bucket fast enough. She's just pouring right back into mine. So the Lord is good. And Susan had a really good attitude about cancer. She said, if the cancer gets me, or she said, if we cure the cancer, I live, yay! And she said, and if we don't cure the cancer and I go to be with Jesus, yay! So, she felt good either way about it. And she also, some people were a little nervous about how quickly Renee and I got together after Susan had passed away, but I had 4 years to mourn, and Susan had begged me to remarry. She said, you have to get married again. You won't survive a year without wanting to take care of him. I was like, excuse me, I'm a grown man, I don't know how to take care of myself. And she was like, no, you don't. You'll be dead of scurvy, years out. And I was like, no, I got this, I got this. Well, when Renee and I got together, I inherited both a new daughter. I had 2 stepdaughters with Susan. I inherited 3 women for the price of 1, or married 3 women. And then when I married Renee, she had her Aunt Helen with her and our daughter Kuzma. And so I got 3 women for the price of 1. It takes all 3 of them to take care of me. They're like, have you eaten? Have you watered? Have you, you've done all these various things? And I'm always like, no. So, yeah. So God is good. The valley of the shadow of death can be really, really long, but God has a plan. God's not guilty. God created a perfect world. We messed it up, so I never was angry at him. And you'll make it through. If you're in the valley now, you'll make it through.
Good word. Good word. The next phrase in Psalm 23 says, you prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. And I have to admit, my image of this verse goes back to childhood. There's a way that I always kind of pictured this in my mind. It's a very visual psalm, right? Sheep and pastures and dark valleys. And my mental image of this, you prepare a table before me, was that the sheep has emerged on the other side of the valley. He's now come out in kind of a nice wide plain, a little tired from the journey, and he's going to sit down and have this nice lunch that the shepherds prepared for him. Behind him, there's still wolves looking out of the end of the valley, but now he's out here on the plain having lunch. And looking at it again this week, I realized that what I had always kind of pictured since childhood simply wasn't right. David doesn't say that this little lamb has emerged from the valley of the shadow of death. He still is in a place where he's surrounded by enemies. It still is dangerous. But he says, here's the thing, even in the middle of that dark place, the shepherd can provide a bountiful banquet. That there can be blessing and quietness and restoration even in the middle of the trial. The wolves are still looking at this lamb as a vulnerable entree, but rather than being afraid that he's going to be the meal, he's being treated to a meal. It's a table that is filled with delicacies. In fact, there's a little bit of a day spa going on here. He's getting a hot oil treatment while he's enjoying his meal. He said that his cup is filled and refilled and overflowing. Every time he takes a sip, the cup fills up again. How do you make that happen? Well, here's the deal. You can't. This is something the shepherd does for you. I don't think the sheep even knew that there was a picnic basket being taken on the journey. It just kind of showed up at an unexpected time.
Ow.
And if you've ever been in those dark valleys, you'll know how it happens. You're going along, it's hard, and suddenly God breaks out the picnic. It doesn't mean the trial is over. It doesn't mean that life just got easy, but it means that he's right there in the midst of it. And it's a friend that comes and spends time and has a kind word that encourages you. It's an unexpected gift. It's a moment of quiet and peace at a sunrise. It's those times that God steps in ways, those small and large, restores your soul. He says, because the Lord is my shepherd, I am thankful and hopeful. He says, surely goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life. In a sense, David takes the role of a prophet. He projects into the future of who he will be, and from that vantage point, he turns around and looks back at his life, where he has come from, and he says, I believe, because of the shepherd that I follow, that someday when I look back on my life, what I will see behind me on that trail, in the bright times and the dark times, is I will see the breadcrumbs of mercy and goodness all along the way. You know, there are paths that I have walked that quite honestly, I never want to walk again. Do you have any of those? They were hard. I hear people sometimes talk about the fact that, well, this was really hard, but knowing what I know now, I would do it all again. I got to tell you, folks, I got a few things in my life I don't want to do again. I'm glad for what God's done, and I'm glad for where He's brought me, but the path itself, it was hard. And yet, as I look back at those excruciating experiences, as you look back at yours, you probably can see in retrospect where God's goodness and His mercy was there even in the hard time. Now I know that all was not lost. He was with me. He is with me. I'm with Him. Because of that, I am saved. Goodness and mercy. Aren't you glad He includes mercy? Goodness is good, right? And you're glad the good shepherd is good, but the good shepherd could justifiably just be good to good sheep. He'd be making probably a good management decision if he adopted a more Darwinian approach. Good sheep that do the right thing are treated well and get to stick with me. Stupid sheep that run off and get themselves in trouble, we're just going to thin the herd a little bit. And yet mercy says that He doesn't leave them. That's what Jesus said. He used that story about the shepherd who had 99 sheep that were safely in the fold. All of them doing what they ought to. And then there's this one sheep that's gone missing. He's wandered off, he's gotten lost, he's got himself into a bind. And what does the shepherd do? He says he leaves the 99, he goes looking for that one to bring him home. He's a good shepherd. Here's what Isaiah has to say. Isaiah 53:6. He says, all we like sheep have gone astray. We have turned everyone to his own way. So before you get too smug and figure, well, I feel bad for the dumb sheep that didn't do the right thing, Isaiah says, we're all sheep. And we're all sheep that have wandered away. We've all gotten lost. And God in His mercy has looked for us, has brought us home, or if we haven't come home yet, He's looking for us. He wants to bring us back. And then David finishes. He says, I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. The little sheep knows that at the end of the journey, the fold awaits. At the end of the trail is a home of ultimate rest and safety. Yesterday, we celebrated Clark Mason's life. A few weeks ago, we celebrated Carol Goodman's life. Both of them people that loved Christ with all their hearts. People who shared love and poured love on others. Both of them went through a terrible final lap on their journey, dealing with cancer. But when the journey was over, they're home. They're home forever. These have been the best weeks they have ever known. The deepest longings of their heart are fully and finally, truly fulfilled. They will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. So, if you're in a desert place, maybe you need to ask, is it because you're following the wrong shepherd? If you're a friend, you're exhausted, maybe the good shepherd is calling you to rest. It's a discipline. If you're in a valley, I want to remind you that you are not alone. The shepherd is with you. If you've been in the valley and you've experienced the shepherd's goodness, I want to encourage you to be willing to tell the story. Because there's somebody else in the valley that needs to know that it's a valley that can be passed through. If you're on your own, you don't have a shepherd. There is a shepherd that knows the trail far better than you, who loves you and is calling you to himself. The Lord is our shepherd. We shall not want. Amen.